Hi, everyone. Welcome to Two Docs Talk. Today, we start our series on technology and healthcare. So, what we're currently seeing is an explosion of new tech, and not just AI, but a whole bunch of new technologies in healthcare that are really poised to revolutionize how we see patients, how we diagnose conditions. Lots of new things coming. Abbas, do you have any comments?
Through past probably 25 or 30 years, as many technology has come and changed our lifestyle and in medicine, like, whether iPhone or fax before or of course email. But I think with this newer technology and AI, I think it's like a tsunami is coming. I think there's so many, every direction you go, whether from, charting the file or whether diagnostic in radiology or as skincare as well as robotic surgery. I think this has tremendously, I think, changing the medicine, not only for urban, also for rural area, the people that they do not have easy access and time to come to the big city. At least they can have some preliminary diagnostic thing and plan better. So I think this is going to change medicine completely, and I think we, not the physician and hospital, but I think the patient have to be acknowledge it and be ready for these changes. Hopefully, all for the good, but I'm sure there are going to be some hiccups as well, and hopefully we have some good regulatory mechanism to make sure that is goes according to the plan or according to we just have to embrace it and hopefully hope for the best.
I think with a lot of new things, there'll be things that are useful, things that are not useful. Um, One of the things for patient care, I think, is available now is you mentioned is telehealth, or video connections with physicians. And in the U.S., it's very common for patients to have access to a hospital lab, so you can and some basic imaging, X-ray, even CAT scan is fairly available within the United States. You might have to drive 30 to 60 minutes, but you can find it. So a lot of times we can get the diagnosis going, the diagnostics going, and then the formal visit recommendation might be done in person in an urban or suburban area, which might entail a much longer drive. But at least that, as you said, the access can be improved with these. I would encourage all patients to sign up, if you haven't already, for the patient portal that's attached to your electronic health record. Make sure you select a secure password. It's really a great way to connect with your medical team. So if you haven't done that, I think that's a great tool to use.
Exactly, and today is like some of the, particularly in radiology, I think AI is doing such a well job, and sometimes it doesn't have to be read in the local area. This gets sent to the export. The same thing with pathology. The same thing with this happening. With many all of as we're going to be talking about skin. So these are, I think, definitely going to change the normal interaction between patient and physician with technology, and be able to relay this information, especially for the people that, for the diagnosis that need a quick attention. So hopefully shorten the interval for waiting for the patient. And so as you said, we can order a scan or we can order labs there, so they get be all ready. So they want to make a trip, so be more of a consolidating, more informative for the patient care, and hopefully this will decrease some of the costs. Hopefully, may not, but this hopefully helps better patient care.
Yeah, AI and radiology, I kind of think of sort of as like the self-driving or car, where we're still allowing, the driver still has to supervise the machine or the robot as it drives down the road. Same thing with radiology. The radiologist has to be there to supervise the machine. Eventually that will no longer be required, but I think radiologists are going to move more toward a procedure-based type of setup, where they're doing more biopsies and other types of work, placing lines and other, type of vascular devices, biopsies and whatnot. This is what it looks like, and the actual imaging component is probably going to be mostly automated, or 95% taken over by the machine, I suspect.
Yeah. Well, we use that in GI for detection of small polyps during the colonoscopy, and that's you go around the bend, sometimes you don't see, but it highlights it. So I think that it hopefully increased the diagnosis and early detection, whether in radiology, whether skin, whether colonoscopy, and I think goes with some pathological specimen that they can use the AI to to be able to at least have some help to a smaller changes on the diagnosis. So I'm very excited. I'm very excited to for this technology, but I says we need to be cautiously optimistic. But I think it's like other technology has come. We have to embrace it. We cannot ignore it because it's coming whether we like it or not. So the more prepared we are, the better we are ready for it.
And this is something I think that's going to be not just this is not just a US or North America phenomenon. This is worldwide. And this is also going on in Asia, throughout Europe. Lots of companies are working to develop these new tech. And I think there'll be a lot of sharing. Hey, they're doing that over there. Let's try that. Let's see how that works. I think it'll be customized to the locale where the physician and patient are. But I think it'll be we have a lot of things, and I don't think it's even possible to really imagine what the next couple of years are going to look like, just because there's changes or something coming so quickly, and we just don't know which ones are going to be adopted and which ones are going to be discarded. Over the next few weeks, we're going to have a series of interviews. Today, we'll be interviewing a gentleman named Mike Druhan, who's CEO of a company called MedX, working to help diagnose skin cancer at an earlier stage. So it's a really neat device that they have at MedX. We'll be talking with a gentleman from a company called ChartNote, which uses AI speech detection to help prepare notes for physicians and also patient education. So lots of interesting things there. Welcome, Mike, to the podcast. We're so glad to have you. And could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I started at MedX about 10 years ago, and we had we had this really interesting technology that was sort of sitting in the box of our company. We're a medical device manufacturer and company, and we have a laser system that does photobiomodulation and for sort of muscle soreness and wound management and stuff like that. But there was this really cool piece of technology sitting in a box called the Cystoscope. And so when I was sitting with the research people, I said, "What's that do?" And turns out it was a standalone PC unit that it goes 2 millimeters below the skin down to the reticular dermis, and it identifies certain chromophores that are associated with the morphology or the evolution of a melanoma or a squamous cell or that. And so I went, well, let me go spend some time with the research people and let me go find out a little bit more about this technology. So what I came to find out, because I'm an operator and I love science and I've done a lot of science tech in my day, I went, dermatologists are the hardest people to get into in certain countries, and they're getting more and more as the baby boomers move along, and we get more and more leisure time and more UV strength and waves. It's a really fast growing cancer in terms of percentage of cancers out there. And I thought, the dermatologist knows right away when he looks at a mole or she looks at a mole or lesion, is there a way that we can get a perfect image along with the patient's information to a dermatologist so they can do a rapid assessment? And Rob, that's where it started. And so I had to build all of the platform that would allow me to keep the information secure. We went on what they call Fire H7 platform, so we're interoperable. We had to be able to handle all of the patient information and handoff and all of that. So what started out as this seems reasonably easy turned out to be a 10-year overnight success, as it were.
And this is done through the primary care physician. Is that correct?
So we don't need a primary care physician. We need just in a technical setting where a technician can take the imaging, record the patient's personal information, and then forward it to a dermatologist for assessment. So everything that we do from a dermatological point of view, in the process is assessed by a dermatologist. And the reason we structured our platform like that was so that, and we geolocate the patient close to the dermatologist, so that if the dermatologist looked at the image and said, that is suspicious, I want to see you in clinic, that we were able to get the patient in right away and expedite the clinic visit. Most of the stuff that gets sent out today, and the British Journal of Medicine did a very interesting research study on this. 1 in 5 dermatology, or 1 in 5 images are looked at, patients that are looked at by general practitioners, and that they miss a melanoma. 1 in 5, that's the numbers, which is frightful, but they're not trained on it like a dermatologist is. The other side of it is that the poor GPs are settled with is that what do they do if they think, I don't know? Well, we're going to send it to the dermatologist. So the lineup now to see the dermatologist is quite extensive, but most of those are sub-Ks or dermafibromas or simple things that look bad, but are really nothing that are, dangerous. So we wanted to be able to get a large number of throughput patients to the dermatologist. Instead of taking 15 minutes for the patient consult, to get it down to about a minute and something like that. Way more throughput, ability for the derm to go low. But at the end, we wanted the decision maker to be the dermatologist.
My question is, like, where patient can access that? They have to go through the dermatology office, or there's a certain center, the tech will take this picture, send it out. Just sort of the logistic of it.
Yeah, so the logistics go like this. As one does in any kind of disruptive technology, you have a little bit at the beginning where you're trying different markets and the adoption curve is a little bit off. But where we found our first big piece of success is in the occupational health space. So I'll speak to a couple different vertical markets here. So the occupational health space, we were very fortunate. There's a wonderful company in the United Kingdom called Health Partners, and they're an occupational health company. They have about 3 million patients under their roster. So they've got about 600 operational customers, and inside of their big customers, they would have a clinic inside some of the big businesses because they're very, very large, and they're outdoor construction companies. They're very large. They're outside nuclear plants. They're very big, and they would have these in clinics. And then they would also have mobile clinics, 300 of them in total, 150 inside, 150 mobile. So what we can do now is go to the at-risk client, so outside construction workers, and because they're outside and they're getting a lot of UV exposure. And as you know, it's a cumulative effect to get to the cancer stage from just over time. And we could do that right in their place of work and then send that image along with the patient's information down to a dermatologist and have the dermatologist assess it. And should the patient be seen as being that? So here's the math we did on it. We did a 2-patient trial, 150 patients in one clinic of this customer at Health Partners, another 100, this is all on our website, another 150 that were done at another construction site. And we expected maybe a 2 or 3% distribution of, needed to be seen. And it turned out to be 11% had to go for dermatological consultation and biopsy, which is a really high hit rate, but it goes to speak for it. So if you think of the customer, the consumer, the patient's behavior, they're back after COVID. They're having a hard time getting to see a dermatologist. They can't get to a GP. There's all of these wait time issues. So they just go, I'll get to it later. And now all of a sudden somebody shows up right in their work site and says, you can come in and get screened if you have anything suspicious. So a little bit of occupational health awareness, a little bit of here's what a suspicious mole may look like, a little bit of that, and all of a sudden they can come in and in 10 minutes we can take a scan of them. We can get a lot of patients through and get them the help they need.
You mentioned wait time, but also there's a whole thing with, and especially in rural, North America, Canada, U.S., just the distance patients have to travel to see a dermatologist. It can be, 3+ hours to get there, and that's a significant impediment in many cases as well.
Well, here's an interesting one. In Canada, where I'm situated, we have Newfoundland, and Newfoundland has all of the dermatologists are in St. John's, Newfoundland, the sort of cap city. But people are coming from Trinity, Newfoundland, 400, 3.5-hour drive to be told, thank you for coming. That's called a sub-K. It's nothing dangerous. Hop in your car. Costco's open till 10, have a nice and head back. So if we can get that efficiency model by having this allocated around. So the next model, people interested in us, is if you think about it, what is the cost for stage 1 melanoma? A stage 1, a stage 0, stage 1 melanoma, you've got a 99% chance of being here in 5 years. That's what the math of the stuff is. And the cost of that's $2,500. Move that up to a stage 4 melanoma, and all of a sudden that number drops down to 23%. And then you're going to miss, this is a piece of research that was done by Bettini in Canada. It's 58 days is what you're going to miss on your first year as a stage 4 melanoma with all the treatments and radiation and back to the clinics and testing and retesting. And you're going to be on immunotherapy drugs, great drugs, because they've really increased the survival rate, but they're very expensive. They can run anywhere from 140 to 185,000 a year, and you're on them for the rest of your life. So an insurer is very interested in our technology because what it does is we can scan a lot of people for that kind of money that's going to be spent at the accident. So the thing about all cancers, catch them early, and we're really good at that. So we have a technology that allows you to efficiently, triage people and get them in front of a dermatologist if they need to be seen.
So we saw the device a little while ago. Can you show us what you've got there?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to share a screen for you, and I'll actually share this one first. So I was out hitting a bucket of golf balls, which, by the way, I'm not very good at, but I enjoy. And there was a lady beside me who heard her twin sister, or not twin sister, her sister, and her sister had a tattoo of Stephen Hawking's on her. And I laughed and I said to her, "That's somebody I recognize. Everybody has the Foo Fighters on them, but I don't know who they are. Sorry, Foo Fighters." But I said, this is really interesting. And then I noticed this mole on her back. And I said, don't mean to be poking and a bit noisy or nosy here, but do you mind if I take a look at that? And she goes, no, not at all. And I called my wife and I said, could you bring the scope up? So, the scope is a handheld scope. We can see it. You can see the lens in here. We can put it on the skin, and I'll go a little bit of that in detail in a minute. But this is you'll get the picture. This was on her back. Now, any dermatologist looking at this would know that's an ugly duckling. And we could take a look at the surface of the skin with our camera so we can see around the surface of it. And then we can take a perfect clinical image with our camera. And you can see, this has got an abnormal border. It's raised, it's got different color. Following the ABCDE, it shows everything. When we take the color actual dermatoscopic view, we're actually marking the chromophores here of melanin, and we can see some radial extension. We can see it along on the border. This was a really big mole. That this is an irregular border. And then if I come over to the blood view, our technology allows us to identify the blood and then the two tumors that are solid, because the light's hitting and there's so much scatter off them, they're showing as hard-based tumor, and the blood supply feeding it. And of course, doctor, you would know, you don't want blood around the tumors because that's a transportation system. And then we can look at the melanin view. So we can polarize and look at it. And this is an interesting one because this is the dermal melanin, which is the concentration of melanin, telling us in confirmation, as we're looking at it from a morphology point of view, it's blocking these two pieces. And that's why we're getting such dark colors into that. And then we get right down to the reticular dermis, where we're 2 millimeters below the skin. And we can see the collagen level here. Now, the good news is there were no black holes in this collagen. If there were black holes through that collagen barrier, we would know that this has penetrated through and the light's going in, which means now we're into the transportation system. Luckily, we caught this. We got to treat it within 72 hours, took it out. It required a little bit more of a bigger incision. But you know what? It was a stage 1 in situ. The patient's going to be fine. But this was a single mom who had been told by 3 doctors that it was nothing. They all thought it was a sub-K. And she has a daughter with cerebral palsy, and she's a single mom. So, when we get to do that, that's kind of what we get to do.
And I just add, a sub-K is a seborrheic keratosis. It's just a benign skin. So it's nothing really, very common, often flaky, a little bit raised, but benign, in contrast to that, which was a melanoma.
Yeah, that was, and it was interesting that they were missed. So they had 3 doctors that looked at it and thought, nah, it doesn't look like anything. And in fact, it was. Now, this is what our actual technology looks like. And I'll just do this, and then I'll go a little bit more about the technology. This is an assessment from a dermatologist. This was a patient, and I got rid of all the identifier information on this one here. But what we do is, when you come into the clinic, the the physical therapist would take a look, or the technician, we would mark it on your body. So we take an avatar, we mark where it is on your body. We ask a number of questions that we built this the following way. When we built this platform, I sat down with some of the top dermatologists. I sat down with Giuseppe Argentenziano. I sat down with Dr. Dan Siegel, who was a former president of the American Academy of Dermatology, and a number of Canadian dermatologists. Said, if I was going to deliver you a digital patient, what would it need to look like? What information do you need to make an assessment, whether it's suspicious or not suspicious? And we added all of those questions, all the questions like, is there heredity in the family? Do you have an outside job? Have you had sunbed? Have you been in those when you were young? Did you live near a hot tropical climate? All of the things that would give an indication of the UV levels of to their skin. And then we marked it. Now, this one was interesting because this patient had her dad of this patient had a stage 3 melanoma on his stomach. So I was particularly interested in this. And this is what our clinical image looked like. And so you can see we put the clinical image we do with this camera. And under all the privacy rules and everything, no images can stay on the computer. Everything is up and fortressed in the cloud. Everything is protected. So the cameras and anything we build ourselves, we're a medical device company, so no images stay on the camera. And we put an optical screen on the top of it so that I have a fixed focal point. This will come in when we start talking about AI, a fixed focal point on the molar lesion, and we can take a perfect image. Now we use our own privacy platform, and you can see when I expand it, there's no pixelation. So there's no compression done. So when a dermatologist is looking at a molar lesion, they can see the skin outline, the hair, everything about it, and they can see it perfectly. That's the clinical view. And then the secondary camera we have here is called a cystoscope. Okay, and the cystoscope is an advanced technology, hyperspectral device. And what it does is it uses between 400 and 900 nanometer wavelengths, and it goes into the skin 2 millimeters below and penetrates all of the molecules that we're identifying that are the chromophores that represent melanin and blood, etc. So on this screen, this is the first shot, the color shot. The way the cystoscope works is the spectral photometry parts all collected in here. It has a nose cone on it, and you can see it has a lens in here. And that's designed so that you can get into hard to reach places where it happens most commonly, on the ears and things of that nature. When I put it on the skin, it again has a fixed focal point. So every image is repeatable. Now that's really important when you're using artificial intelligence, which is something we're continuing to develop into. Teledermatology hasn't had the acceptance or adoption curve because people are using cell phones, and although they're great for taking pictures of the family picnics and things like that, for using them for medical purposes, you start to get different wavelengths, different angularity, different color. And then when you go to send it, because you've got compression that goes across, if you're moving it across, the dermatologist goes, it's either Hawaiian Island or a melanoma. I really can't tell. So we wanted to be able to deliver it to them exactly as if the patient was sitting in front of them. So here you can take a look at this, and you can see we've got odd pigmentation here. When we come down in here, the blood supply, and I'll click onto the bloodstream now. I can see the blood supply here. We got a little bit of scaling in here because it was dry skin. We can see the dermal melanin is collecting over on, and it's just a morphology and the collagen levels, but we can tell from the look on this that this has got an odd pigment to it. So when that went to the dermatologist looked at it and said, just let me get this back to me. And then here was the dermatologist comment on it. Dermatologist recommended a narrow full excision by scooper full to the fat for flawlessly. In the clinical image, the lesion is irregular with multiple colors. In the dermoscopic and melanin views, there are multiple apparent pigmented network diagnostic of a pigmented lesion. The irregular peripheral structureless area is concerning. And by the time that came back 2 weeks after it went to the derm pathology, which is where the analysis is really done, this was a superficial melanoma, and we were able to get it out. The patient's fine. So we get to do that all the time. So that's kind of what we do as a technology, and that's what we do. So the idea behind it now in the vertical markets, from my perspective, is let's get at the at-risk patients And then let's start to build out in there to the insurance industries, because they're very interested with their group benefit plans of being able to get, more services that are preventative to their patients. And we're starting to see a pickup on the insurance industry interested in our technology. But I will say, like any good technology, the adoption curve is based on healthcare moves at the speed of trust. And we've spent a lot of time collaborating with dermatologists, collaborating on what needed to be done correctly so that we could provide a uniform solution to a triaging problem.
And how available it is in North America, both in America and Canada?
I would say we're just starting our rollout into the Canadian market. And we're dealing with some, once we had the occupational one done with health partners in the UK, all of a sudden we had other occupational health companies. And for the first time, the company started to receive inbound calls versus, when you're first starting with a new technology. We suspect we're going to have more and more of that happen. We're bringing 2 people onto our advisory board in the next week that will add to the credibility of our technology. That'll write a little bit more paperwork around it so that it gets a greater acceptance within the community. But we've had great acceptance from the dermatological community because, the dermatologist, for their part, they want to see melanomas, right? Like to have a sub-K come in or a dermafibromas, those kinds of things. It spends a lot of their time where they could just do this literally with some half decent imaging and a little patient background information. So I would say to you, in North America, we will have some, I think, some fairly good news coming out around that, which will show more acceptance of it. And now the next part is we're starting to concentrate into the US market, which is where we really want to be.
And how much do you think average a patient cost will be? I'm sure insurance company eventually are going to pick it up. What's an average cost if I want to pay out of my pocket, go get screened?
Yeah, so we haven't moved to that commercial model yet on the retail side. We could do this if we were sitting inside a retail clinic and paying for the privacy of the derm to read it, probably around $200 that you could go in and have, if you had 4 or 5 moles on you, you wanted to have sort of looked at, we could easily do a working model around that. The insurance company, of course, they benefit from the fact that, for the amount of a stage 4 melanoma, they could do an awful lot of screening in the at-risk population. And then the 58 days of work that people miss in the first year, that's important. So take industries like the airline industry. Pilots are highly susceptible to skin cancer. That's what the latest studies are because of cosmic radiation leak, especially long haul pilots. They get a lot, so they get it in there. And if you dislocate an airline pilot, that's a very expensive replacement asset. Also, we do a lot. We're starting to work with some of the military because people are going out and spending a lot of time in areas we never seem to fight where there's a darkness. It's always where there's too much sunlight, and so there's areas where we could do targeted work at the beginning. In terms of the early access to this, I think you'll eventually see this spread out into the pharmacy chains, where you could just go into a pharmacy and say, look, I've got a concern for my son or my grandmother, and can we just get this one spot looked at, and just for peace of mind. One of the things that shocked me when I was doing a lot of this is, you're there looking for the melanoma, but there's this worried, somebody's sitting there with something on them, especially in the Canadian market, and they've got to get 12 months waiting for a dermatologist. They're calling every day. They're trying to get in. They're trying to game the system to get in. Well, wouldn't it be great if you could just walk in and pay for the service and find out you're okay? So now you don't have that anticipatory anxiety anymore.
Is there, Mike, a visit with the dermatologist over the internet, a teledermatology consult that happens, or is the dermatologist simply looking at the skin and then notifies the patient that they need to come in?
Yeah, that's a very good question, doctor, especially on the patient workflow. The teledermatology systems in COVID found this with dermatologists. All of a sudden they were on video. And, everybody's going, they're doing this as grandma, and, the family's coming in and the derm's going, this isn't how we manage patient flow. So we were very careful to make sure that we said to like Dan Siegel and other people said, if the patient doesn't come to you, what do we need to provide you so that you can make a diagnosis? And it just turns out that, most derms spend an awful lot of their time doing this. They're pattern recognition mammalians. They get a clinical picture and they get a dermoscopic picture, and there's sort of a 10-second rule. They'll know within 10 seconds if it's suspicious or not. And the great default of our system is they can look at it and say, sorry, can't render a decision, need to see the patient in clinic. But for the stuff that's simple, that they don't need to see the patient, we can sort of dispel of that quickly.
So what the future you see with the next 4 or 5 years?
I think this is a very exciting time for us because now we're at a point where we've gotten a large scale customer that we're getting lots of patients going through. It's got a very high acceptance rates from everybody. So, I think you're starting to see a trend where the employers are taking better care of their people because they want them healthy. And if they're outside working, they have a bit of a responsibility rather than say, don't forget to wear your sunscreen. When you can provide that kind of service and you can do preventative. And really what we found is we caught in the 26 patients we caught, they were telling everybody, you should get this done. So all of a sudden there's this sort of chasing behavior around everybody, like, I've got your back. So I'm looking at you and seeing, oh, you should get that looked at. Rob, I don't like what's up. You know what I mean? And they're telling each other. So, and now they've got a place where they can walk into, they don't have to worry about going to a GP and then getting a referral, missing work. It's provided for them right in the work environment. So what do I see? I see lots of things we haven't thought about in how to use our technology for areas, but I think we will be able to get at the at-risk patients, and a lot more creativity will start to show up on how to get to markets.
That's great. And I think in the US, probably there's some community health stuff like that probably that they do preventive care and hopefully they do not get cut. So I think that's another good place to go just when you go for screening, to whether your blood pressure or whether your cholesterol, and that can be a tool if there's any suspicious lesion, so then they can get diagnosed. And as you said, I think I had friends that unfortunately had melanoma and in medical school and just waited a few months and just said they were not sure there. And unfortunately, by the time it was too late to treat at that time. So I think, and in Colorado is with so much sunshine, and now I'm in California, this is tremendously how much you have to watch out for skin. I'm in a farm all the time, trying to protect myself, but you always worry about all this radiation and all these changes.
Well, I think you make a really good point. And I think the idea is, cancer doesn't wait. Why should you? Right? And if I can get you in and get you access quickly, that's the big part. That's the first big part of it. So let's just get enough of the devices out there that people can start to do it, and it'll start to pick up through word of mouth and through proper, patient success. And then when the dermatologists go, I like this because now I can sit here, in an afternoon, I can stay home or at my son's soccer or whatever I'm doing, and I can just log on, bring up patients and say, need to see him. That's a sub-K, that's a sub-K. And we have the patient full circle of care protected on our system. So all of a sudden, if it has to be handed off to plastics, and then you want the report to go back to the GP, so that all of that stuff is inbound and on our system. And also, let's say it's something that's evolving but not quite there. You can come back a year later or 5 years later if it changes, and we can actually compare it. We can take it on the same part, because you know how you'll come back if it changes. The derm doesn't remember the 10,000 moles he's seen, but on our system we can pull it up and actually do a direct comparison and overlay it to see if it's evolved at all from a morphology point of view, and that's valuable as well.
In the intro, Mike, you talked a little bit before we started recording about AI, and I thought that was an interesting way you're using AI to for quality control. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so we looked at the AI very well. So we're very fortunate. We have Dr. Trevor Champagne on our advisory, and Trevor was really interested. I mean, we get on quite well, and we got on to early stages with the artificial intelligence. And Trevor has a background in computer science and mathematics, as well as a dermatologist. So the understanding of the image and where the limitations are with AI versus not. So we thought it could be used very much as a yield tool. Whereas if 42% of the images right now in teledermatology are not being accepted, you're not going to have an adoption curve for any kind of real teledermatology technology platform. Ours is less than half of 1%. And that was just because somebody was moving when they had the cystoscope taking an image. So you can use AI to look at the image before we send it to make sure it's not blurry. And if it is, not send it. So we can get to 100% accuracy. Secondly, you can take a look at images that don't have a lot of stuff going on below the skin and know they're pretty superficial, and we can subset them out. So earlier dermatologists, because it's a steep learning curve for dermoscopy, if you could send them simpler cases until they get a feeling and orientation of what's going on below the skin, it's a good training mechanism for an early dermatologist so that they're not doing a lot of biopsies and driving up the prices, and giving the more complex images to more sophisticated, not sophisticated, more seasoned dermatologists and that. And you have the ability to consult on that amongst themselves because we're on the Fire 87 platform. So we're using AI that way. The other side we're using AI is because we ask for the patient's, it's like this, we love you, but we really love your images. Can we use this, you anonymized? Because we get back the report on what the patient, with proper agreement from the patient for the consideration of this, we can tell what the morphology of what it was. So all of a sudden you have a repository of perfect images, clinical images, below the skin surface images, diagnostic images, and now you know exactly what it is. So AI, we can use that repository for enhancing AI. I still think AI has a great use for that. As a pure diagnostic tool, I think we're a long ways off, and that's what the large meta studies show. High sensitivity because everybody's getting sent, but low specificity, and that's going to be on for quite some time. And the FDA has been challenged with that, of course, on how to go ahead and start to approve it for that. And I think it's best left in the dermatologist's hand. That's our take on the AI.
Mike, it's been great having you. Do you have any closing thoughts, and how can our listeners find you?
Our company's called MedX Health Corp. We're on the internet, and then I think that we've got LinkedIn and all that sort of things of that nature.
We'd love to see your tech enter the U.S. market here ASAP. It sounds like you're in the U.K. and Canada, so
yeah, we're a public company, so I have to be a little bit careful around what I say. But I would say you'll be seeing us soon.
Well, we're looking forward to that, and hopefully we can have maybe another touch up maybe in a year or so to see how the things are going, and I'm sure it's going to be fascinating to see how this AI as well as others changing the medicine.
Oh yeah, I'm excited about our future with it, and I just want to thank you ever so much for allowing me an opportunity to speak today. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing this with our viewers.